as we do on just about every Monday at this time, we get to visit with our good friend Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report. Scott, good morning. How are you today?
Doing well, Chad. How's everybody in Lubbock?
We're doing well. Now, are you still in Nevada, or are
I
you
am back here in the People's Republic of Austin,
where
Bernie Sanders was rallying yesterday? We're told he had about 12,000 people show up there at Lady Bird Lake. I can confirm, Chad, that Austin is chock full of liberals. They were all there, and I guess there was an event about 4,000 to 5,000 people, something like that, down in San Antonio.
Yeah,
probably about 7,000 people in Houston. He's turning out big crowds, and they are enthusiastic. But I can tell you that there is a sort of panic setting in among some of the Democrats. I would say not just what you might call the Democratic establishment, but other Democrats who are a little more moderate than, say, somebody who goes on CBS and defends Fidel Castro. And you had, I don't know if you watched the interview with AC, Anderson Cooper, and Sanders going out of his way to talk about how there was a literacy program under Fidel Castro. Thank you for that. By the way, somebody else pointed out that, of course, if all of your propaganda was written down, the first thing you would do is teach people how to read.
Right.
And the reading was part of the whole propaganda program there in Cuba. But look, this is almost an alarm bell sounding time for some of these Democrats who are saying, look, there needs to be some consolidation of what people too often call the moderate lane in the Democratic Party. You've got all of these candidates who are still in it, like Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Biden, Bloomberg, who are running as the more moderate alternatives, right? And if you look at the vote totals, it is true that the quote-unquote moderates, there are more of them than the Sanders folks. You go state to state, Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, but because Bernie is the one who is running in that far, far left Democratic Socialist lane, he just has the biggest of the small groups. So he's running away with the nomination at this point. We'll see what happens in South Carolina. I think Democrats are going to stop maybe holding off on voting in Texas over the course of this next week of early voting. I think a lot of folks, just anecdotally, I was talking to people who were saying they were wanting to see how things turned out in Nevada before they locked in their vote, which I can see that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, look, if you've got the candidate in mind that you want to be president, you might as well go ahead and do it. I remember back in 2008, I know we've talked about this, but in 2008 when I was working in Houston, the lines out the door, even after 7 o'clock on Election Day, were nuts when Clinton and Obama were still battling it out for the Democratic nomination. I don't think people want to go through that. I was under the impression that we might see results in the Texas primary a little after midnight next Tuesday. So it's going to take some time to tabulate the votes, get everybody actually in the booth to vote. And so if people do want to, register their opinion on this, they might as well go ahead and lock in their votes now.
Scott, I asked you over the weekend on Twitter, and listen, we're coming down. We've got early voting. This is the second week of early voting in Texas. All eyes obviously are going to be on Texas as Bernie Sanders held his rallies over the weekend. How odd is it? I mean, Bernie Sanders is the front runner right now for the Democrat Party.
No question. Mm-hmm.
How odd is it for Texas to be voting Election Day right around the corner, and still not a major figure in Texas has endorsed the Democrat frontrunner for president of the United States?
Not one single elected Democratic, major office holder in the state has said that people should vote for Bernie Sanders. Just last week, you had the pretty popular county judge in Harris County, young Latina, Lena Hidalgo, go with Warren. And so you have some of the Latino activists and office holders going with Warren. The Castro brothers are for Warren. The only notable Texan, I would say, who's on the list for Sanders is former Agriculture Commissioner Jim Hightower, who, by the way, was in a news story this weekend saying that those Democrats who are scared of Bernie, he said they were just sort of fraidy cats. I would remind the listeners that Hightower, of course, lost to Rick Perry years ago, as Hightower was more liberal and Perry represented the the new Republicans who had been old Democrats who were more conservative, and so we've seen this play out in Texas before. It is strange, but it's also a sign of the fact that everything is so compressed, Chad. I mean, I was in Nevada Friday and Saturday for the caucuses, and even before the caucuses were over, Sanders beat me back here to Texas because he was already campaigning in San Antonio, then on to Houston, then on to Austin. And so these folks, they don't have any time to waste. They can't, wait around for endorsements. They can't wait around for anything. They've got to get in front of voters and make their case because people are voting now in early voting. And by the time next Tuesday rolls around, we'll know who will have won the Texas primary, at least in the presidential contest.
You tweeted out a new poll that was released today.
University of Texas poll, interesting, has Biden and Sanders essentially tied, and the top lines in this poll are sort of fascinating. I'm going to post it all on quorumreport.com so people can take a look at the entire thing. But Joe Biden is at about 22.5% to 22.1%. Bernie Sanders within the margin of error, very tight. Elizabeth Warren behind them at about 18%, and it drops precipitously after that with Bloomberg and Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar. But very interesting, Chad. Whether or not the person agrees with you on issues, according to this poll, whether the candidate agrees with the voters on the issues, takes a big back seat to whether or not the person can beat President Trump in the fall, which tracks with a lot of the polls that we've seen. Only 31% or so of the respondents in this poll said that the most important thing to them was that the candidate actually agrees with them on the issues. 57.1% said that the most important thing is the candidate can beat President Trump, at least in their perception. And one question that was asked, does the person have enough experience, the right experience? Only about 11% cared about that. Yeah. So I wouldn't discount Mayor Pete just yet.
I think there's a very good chance that Bernie wins here in Texas, and I don't know the exact dates when that poll was taken, but when just from your experience of Nevada going for Bernie, you see the momentum for Bernie Sanders. How much does that weigh on voters, even here in Texas, when they're seeing the vice president collapse all over the map? How much does that weigh on them?
Very important. And by the way, that poll was in the field earlier this month, February 6th through the 18th, so before the Nevada caucuses. It's a good point. I think seeing the momentum is what's important right now because of what we were just talking about with the way that all of these contests happen really fast at this point. You had the Nevada caucuses. South Carolina happens this weekend. If people wait until South Carolina, to see how that turns out before they register their vote in Texas, then they will have to vote on Election Day because early voting will be over. Yeah. Everything's happening so quickly. And at this point, Bernie is the man to stop.
Yeah, well, and I think there's also the mentality everyone kind of wants to vote for the winner, right? I mean, in the primary, that eventually gets to it where people can say, "Oh yeah, I was on the bandwagon too. No one wants to be the Klobuchar voter right now, or the or even the Warren voter. I mean, they want to be kind of with the crowd."
There is some truth to that, and if you think about it through the lens of the way that the establishment and the Republican Party dealt with the Tea Party years ago, I remember at the time there were a lot of Republicans who were nervous about who the Tea Party folks were and what they were all about and what kind of candidates they'd be voting for. But those folks are sort of, it's not that they're afraid of the Tea Party folks, but they certainly don't want to make them angry. Right, and so they wouldn't just say out loud, in an on-the-record way, these people are, wrong about X, Y, and Z. Instead, it would always be an off-the-record sort of thing, like, can I just tell you these people don't know what they're talking about? And then you would have that conversation. And I think that's happening a lot on the Democratic side now, with all these people who are very excited about Bernie Sanders and maybe don't even really understand what the policies he's pushing. What ramifications they would actually have. And I think that's borne out by that poll information. A lot of these folks maybe don't even care that the guy may not really agree with them when it comes to the way health care ought to be addressed or other big issues, but instead they do believe that he can be the guy who takes on President Trump.
Scott, there was an article that I sent you from the Wall Street Journal. It's been interesting. Some of the national folks who have been looking at different Texas races, including a Texas House race. The headline here, Texas House race, test Democrat voters' appetite for liberal insurgents. And even AOC getting involved in one of these local races.
AOC, and of course this is a Texas congressional race that the headline might be a little misleading for. I know they don't intend it, but for those of us who actually watch the Texas House, it's a Texas congressional race, South Texas. This insurgent candidate Jessica Cisneros is taking on Congressman Henry Cuellar down in Laredo, and Cuellar, a pretty conservative Democrat. I mean, I think that's fair to say. This is somebody who would consider himself to be pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, pro-oil and gas industry, etc. And the liberal who's running against him, Cisneros, is all for the Green New Deal, and would say that she's, adamantly pro-choice and liberal in every respect. She does have the support of AOC and the Justice Democrats, who were the ones to help AOC get elected in the first place when she knocked off that entrenched incumbent in the Bronx. I would amend the headline just slightly to say that this is testing Democratic South Texas voters and their appetite for liberal insurgents. I'm not sure that this is as big a deal as national media has made it out. One telling thing about it, Chad, is that when I look at the local media coverage of this race, it's almost non-existent. I mean, there's some stories there, but it seems like the journalists who are on the ground and actually live in Laredo, live in that part of Texas, are not taking the race as seriously because it looks like Cuellar is probably going to be okay, although the counter-argument to that is that he's been going negative against Cisneros, saying she's not really from the district and wouldn't really represent the district. And they also had some big firepower this weekend with the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, who was down in the area and campaigning some for Cuellar. And, of course, she was criticized by the further left folks in the Democratic Party, saying that Pelosi is campaigning for somebody who's way too conservative, that he ought to be a Republican. So, of course, as you and I have covered the purity tests for years in the Republican Party and the Republican Party primaries, where everyone argues that they are the most conservative, the rock-ribbed conservative on the left, and in the Democratic Party they have their own purity tests, and it's playing out right now in South Texas. I think for the electorate there, if it's anything like it has been in previous elections, and I can't imagine that the composition has changed all that much, even though you did have the surge in Democratic voting in 2018, which of course brought out to different kinds of Democratic voters. When you talk to Democrats from South Texas, talk to them about guns, for example. The right question isn't, whether or not they support gun control. The question is, how many guns do you own? It's a lot, right? And, are you pro-choice or pro-life? I think you probably in South Texas get more Democrats who would say they're pro-life than pro-choice. Unless the electorate has shifted in a dramatic way, Cuellar is probably going to be okay.
Another race I want to ask you about, is there any buzz, any news, anything whatsoever in that little Democrat primary for U.S. Senate on the Democrat side?
Not much. I think the electorate is still trying to figure out who all these folks are, 8 or 9 people running.
It's early voting, Scott.
And they're still trying to figure that out. Who are these? This is one of those races where, no, you're right, it's one of those races where, and by the way, AOC is involved in that one as well. She endorsed one of the candidates, Cristina Cincin Ramirez, who was the candidate who said that she was more Mexican than other Mexicans.
I was about to say, she's more Mexican than anybody from what I hear.
Helped her stand out. So the candidates are being guessed among. People are just guessing for the 8 or 9 candidates who are running to take on John Cornyn. I think it may be safe to say, and who knows, but that Cincin Ramirez and M.J. Hager, who ran for Congress from the Austin area this past cycle, the two of them looks sort of positioned to advance to the runoff, but don't discount Royce West, who's Texas Senate Democrat from Dallas. We'll have to see how it turns out.
So officially unsure, can't advance into the runoff, right?
Officially no choice. No idea who these folks are.
Before I let you go, what's the governor up to when it comes to keeping Republican control of the Texas House?
He is holding a telephone town hall tonight to talk to activists around the state about what they need to do to try to shore up Republican support in the Texas House as Republicans try to hold on to the majority. Of course, Democrats would only need to pick up 9 seats to win the majority in the Texas House. And he's also going to be doing some get-out-the-vote efforts in North Texas later this week. He's involved in a primary there. Jared Patterson is a state representative from Denton County, and he has a spirited primary, and looks like the governor's going to be there to help him in Frisco coming up on Thursday. So he's getting real active about this in a way that he hasn't quite been before.
Very good. Tell folks what they can find at Quorum Report.
We'll be looking for late money this week. It's time for those 8-day reports, campaign finance reports, to see if large groups are jumping into various primaries around the state on both the Republican and Democratic side. And, of course, we always bring all the news in real time about your state government at quorumreport.com.
All right, Scott, as always, appreciate your time, and we'll visit with you next week.
Thanks, Chad.
Thank you. That's Scott Braddock, editor, quorumreport.com.